That's been absolutely terrible, as it is for everyone. I mean, you see us in press conference. You haven't seen me as much in the media, but you see our families and the raw emotions out there, and the grief, the frustration. We go through a range of emotions, from anger to frustration to grief. For me, it comes at different times during the day.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about Scott Peterson. The panelists have spoken again, and everybody wants to hear about this guy. And as you guys, I can't believe we haven't done this guy before. This is the most hilarious thing I've ever seen, as far as somebody trying to lie. I can see why people want to see this.
Now, Laci's family says they can no longer trust you.
Mm-hmm. It was unfair and inappropriate for me to have that relationship.
How do you feel, though, that, the Rocha family says they can't trust you?
They're wonderful people, the Rocha family. I know that, we all have love between us. And I know that we'll all keep searching for Laci. And, I told Laci about the relationship. She knew about it, and it's important between us.
At the end of our last episode, Amber Frey called the tip line on the 30th of December to report her relationship with Scott Peterson, husband to 8-month pregnant Laci Peterson, who'd been missing for a week by then. After praying for guidance the day before, Amber met with Modesto detectives Al Brocchini and John Bueller for her first interview. And when she not only came forward with information about their affair with Scott, but also agreed to record her phone calls with him, Bueller and Brocchini saw her as an answer to their prayers as well. She'd quietly been working with law enforcement to get more information from Scott for 2 weeks when Saki Vincent sold the pictures to the press on the 16th, and had surprisingly taken the media 2 additional weeks to learn who the blonde on Scott's arm actually was. But once they learned her name, everything else about her spilled out into the public as well. She became inundated with a constant barrage of press who not only began to follow Amber's every move, but tracked down her friends and family too. The backlash from the public began soon after, with many seeing her as a homewrecker, a siren who lured another woman's husband away, possibly twisting his mind to murder Laci, or worse yet, plotting to commit the deed herself. People get creative when given an incomplete set of facts, and between the public beginning to turn on her and the mobs of media that become too aggressive to ignore, the decision was made by the Modesto Police Department to have Amber Frey do a press conference.
First of all, I want to thank you for your patience. We'd like to preface the news conference by requesting that you respect our willingness to inform the media to limited information that does not compromise the investigation. Ms. Amber Frey will make a brief statement and she will not answer any questions. Today, because of extensive efforts by some members of the media, Amber Frey was identified and contacted by reporters at her place of business. She notified the Modesto Police to contact and her safety and privacy. She is prepared to give a statement and she will not accept any questions from Amber Frey.
Okay, first of all, I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002. I was introduced to him. I was told he was unmarried. Scott told me he was not married. We did have a romantic relationship. When I discovered he was involved in the Laci Peterson disappearance case, I immediately contacted the Modesto Police Department. Although I could have sold the photos of Scott and I to tabloids, I knew this was not the right thing to do. For For fear of jeopardizing the case or the police investigation, I will not comment further. I am very sorry for Laci's family. The pain that this has caused them. And I pray for her safe return as well. I would appreciate to my friends and acquaintances to refrain from I ask to respect my privacy. Thank you.
Amber Frey had contacted Modesto Police Department on Monday, December 30th, 2002. She met with detectives and gave information about the relationship with Scott Peterson. This information was verified by a variety of means, and Amber Frey has been cooperative in the investigation and has been eliminated as a suspect in Laci Peterson's disappearance. For the near future, we've asked Ms. Frey not to make any statements to the media. It is her desire that you respect her privacy. Please don't follow, harass, or make any other attempts to interview her during the investigation. This concludes the press conference.
She was terrified, of course, but her statement came across as raw and honest. The vulnerability, regret, and compassion for Laci's family was evident, and so was her fear, all of which helped make it so effective. Of course, there would always be those who continued to look at her with suspicion or disdain, but the press conference went a long way with the public and the media, who now saw Amber as a victim aligned with Laci, rather than a temptress and potential suspect in her disappearance. We can only speculate about the motivation for the rare decision by law enforcement to display a witness to the press in the midst of an investigation, but there were other repercussions to having Scott's mistress transported to Modesto in order to broadcast her statement. One of them being Amber's visit with Sharon Rocha the next day. 3 of Laci's closest friends not only watched Amber give her statement live, but met with her afterward. While Stacy Boyers, Lori Ellsworth, and Renee Tomlinson chatted with Scott's girlfriend at the police department, Sharon was recovering from her anger and confusion after watching the live broadcast with a group of friends. She forced herself to watch, describing it as another layer of torture for her, but she felt it was necessary for her to hear Amber's story, and she decided directly afterward that she needed to talk to her. Lead Detective Craig Grogan was a bit hesitant to arrange the call, initially expecting Sharon might decide to tear Amber to pieces once she had her on the line, but she assured him she only wanted to express her gratitude for Amber's coming forward. She'd seen what the rest of the world saw and what Laci's friends witnessed in person as Amber made her statement, immediately aware she'd simply been a different sort of victim of Scott's lies. She believed he was single, and she certainly had no part or knowledge of whatever horror he'd inflicted on Laci. Once Sharon had Amber on the phone, she sincerely thanked her for speaking out publicly, and she expressed her sympathy for the horrible situation she'd found herself in. From the moment Sharon Rocha saw Amber Frey walk to the podium, she couldn't help but compare her to Laci. Knowing Scott was planning a future with her, and convinced he'd been scheming to kill her daughter and her grandson all the while, Sharon watched and wondered if this woman could have been the sole reason why. As they spoke on the phone after, she invited her over. Lori Ellsworth took Amber home with her, where she spent the night as she and several other close friends shared stories about Laci. Renee Tomlinson drove her to Sharon's house the next morning. It was surreal having her daughter's husband's lover sitting in her living room, and it was hard for her to hear most of the things Amber had to say. Not only because Amber might be the reason her daughter had been ripped away from her, But because the dates and times and lies from Scott were spilling out of her so quickly, Sharon couldn't keep up. Amber went over her history with Scott, starting with their introduction through Sean Sibley, but as she began to quickly rattle off dates, Sharon connected them with what was going on with Laci and her family back in Modesto, while Scott carried on with his affair. She asked Amber to stop for a moment so she could grab her calendar. We already know how Scott juggled Amber and lied to Laci between the time the affair began and the point when all the balls dropped after she called the tip line. So let's discuss how his shady behavior lined up with Sharon's calendar from the 28th of December through the end of January, as Amber helped her fill in the blanks. Sharon knew that on the 28th of December, authorities had expanded the scope to include over 4,000 square miles of wetlands just west of the city. Thankfully, the number of volunteers swelled with the increasing media exposure, helping to strengthen the numbers for continued search efforts. Dive teams and boats investigated bodies of water large and small through 7 different counties in the valley and beyond. But by the end of December, the major focus of the marine searches began to shift, from the creek in the park where Scott said Laci planned to walk their dog that morning, to the San Francisco Bay, where he'd taken his odd fishing trip during the time frame she'd gone missing. For Sharon, the turn in the investigation was far from surprising. After learning trailing dogs followed Laci's scent in the opposite direction of the park, eventually leading their handlers west over nearly a third of the distance to Berkeley Marina. It was the morning of the 28th that the scent dog signaled on the boat ramp Scott used the afternoon Laci vanished, and this wasn't long after a cadaver dog displayed strange behavior around both the shed in his backyard and the boat he fished in that day. But not all the canines that kicked up suspicion around Scott during the investigation worked for the sheriff's department. That evening, after briefly getting a moment alone with him at the volunteer center, Laci's mother Sharon was shocked after hearing Scott's plan to hire a dog psychic, leaving her with the impression he wasn't taking the search seriously. And it seems the dogs weren't quite done with Scott just yet, as it'd be his treatment of Mackenzie that stood out to Sharon as one of the biggest red flags Scott put up before Laci disappeared. Mackenzie was the first Christmas present Laci'd ever given Scott, a special gift to celebrate their love and commitment to each other over their first Christmas together in 1995. Their second Christmas, Scott proposed, and they were married that summer, but by their third, he'd already had his first affair. Laci's grandmother passed away just following their fourth, and a few months after their fifth, they sold their restaurant in San Luis Obispo, moving to Modesto that summer. Their sixth Christmas was spent hosting a party in their new house, where Laci announced their plans to try for a baby, but the following holiday would be her last. It was 2001, and she and Scott hosted the family Christmas party again, but she still hadn't conceived, and he told his sister-in-law, Rose, that he was kinda hoping for infertility. Laci vanished before she could celebrate Christmas of 2002, what would have been her 8th Christmas with Scott, and their beloved golden retriever Mackenzie had been with them for each one. According to Scott, the dog was even with her when she disappeared, technically making Mackenzie the last member of her family to see her alive. He was very protective of Laci. Sharon knew that was partly due to how well she cared for the dog. He was very pampered and loved, with a bed placed not far from her own. He'd never been left alone overnight, and certainly never slept outside. Sharon was instantly aware something was off when Mackenzie was left to sleep in the yard alone, just days before Laci disappeared. But what she didn't know was that just after Mackenzie's 7th birthday, Scott told his new girlfriend that he didn't have any pets. He told Amber he wanted a dog. In fact, he told her he used to have one until he had to get rid of it, with no time to properly love and care for it. But he looked forward to the future when he could get another one. Of course, Sharon's mindset was well established in his guilt by then, nearly certain of it the moment she'd heard of the affair, but his mention of replacing the dog to Amber gave her insight to back up her theory about how he could have detached himself enough from his real dog Mackenzie and his real wife Laci to be capable of killing her. But by the 30th of December, as Amber spoke with Ablow, the tables began to turn, and it became Scott who was living on borrowed time. When Amber made the call, she was initially connected to a clerk named Beverly, but we'll let Amber and Detective Brocchini explain the rest.
I'm standing behind our clerk, and she's typing, and I'm watching, and it's Scott Peterson is my boyfriend. We've been dating exclusively. He said he wasn't married, and I'm like, Bev, is that lady on the phone? Yeah, and so I talked to her, and it was Amber Frey, and
couldn't get any words out for a while. And I was like, it is him. Like, this is him.
And I'm like, okay, don't go nowhere. I'm going to come visit you right now.
Detectives John Bueller and Al Brocchini drove to Fresno to interview Amber immediately after the call came in. And though Fresno Detective Richard Bird was there that morning as well, he didn't stick around for Bueller and Brocchini to arrive. Shawn Sibley left her Uncle Doug's place with Amber to meet detectives at 11 o'clock on the morning of December 30th. Bueller took Shawn's statement in front of Amber, but when it came time for Amber's interview, she asked her best friend to step out of the room. Amber and Shawn told them about their encounters and conversations they had with Scott up until then, before going to lunch with the detectives. Amber asked Brocchini's honest opinion about Scott while they ate, but wasn't entirely prepared for his response. He essentially told her in his experience with cases like these, it was very likely that Laci was long since dead, and that Scott was most certainly the one who'd killed her. Although Bueller chimed in with a bit of hope, telling Amber that there was always the chance of a more positive outcome. But he'd been suspicious of Scott since their first introduction.
Well, I suspected Scott when I first met him. Didn't mean he did it, but I was a little bit thrown off by his calm, cool demeanor and his lack of questioning.
By the time they finished their lunch, Amber had agreed to wire her phone in order to begin recording her calls with Scott, and conveniently enough, there was a Radio Shack across the street from the restaurant. After doing a bit of shopping together, they set up Amber's phone with the equipment to record, and while they were still outside of the store, the moment they'd finished testing the line, Scott called. Even though she was beyond nervous and unprepared, she picked up. The static was terrible, but she was able to hear him tell her it was 2 o'clock in Europe, where he was still pretending to be. He slipped a little when he told her he'd just finished eating dinner, considering it was 5 o'clock in Modesto, where he was really calling from. And she heard him say something about people being insane just before the call dropped. Amber later began to suspect he'd been intentionally doing something to fake the static and poor connection, hanging up on her whenever it was convenient, but she was obviously certain the instant the lie left his lips that he wasn't in Europe. He called her right back, but the connection was just as bad. He told her he was in Normandy and had plans to travel to Paris the following day. It was another short call because he couldn't hear her, or pretended not to, but it was just as well. Amber was so shaken up, she was sure he would have picked up on her nervousness if she'd been on the phone with him much longer. But she became far more comfortable recording him over the next several weeks, capturing hundreds of hours of their conversations, with him still pretending to be half a world away from many of them. But it'd be the calls they exchanged over the new year that caused the most damage for Scott with the press, and later with the jury. In the midst of Laci's disappearance, New Year's Eve of 2002 looked a lot different for the community of Modesto than it had in years past. Rather than making plans to gather with family and friends to celebrate, residents, along with the massive media, flocked to Laci's vigil in Dry Creek Park. The event was scheduled to begin at 4:30 that afternoon, but while the stage went up and network cameras jockeyed for the best angle to capture the grieving family, Amber was calming her nerves to place another call to Scott. At 3 o'clock, she steeled herself enough to dial his cell phone, and he didn't answer at first, but he called her right back, talking through another terrible connection and unable to hear her on the other end of the line. It was quickly apparent there wouldn't be much conversation, but for detectives, Scott said plenty.
Hello?
Amber!
Hi!
Amber!
I can hear you.
Amber! Amber, can you hear me? It's New Year's.
I know. I can hear you.
Amber, it's New Year's here. Are you there?
Yes. Are you having a good time?
Amber! Hey, Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year.
I wanted to call you.
Thank you.
Amber, you there?
I'm here.
Amber,
I wish you could hear me.
I'm on the, I think that you're there. I'm near the Eiffel Tower. New Year's celebration is unreal. The crowd is huge.
The crowd's huge?
Amber,
Yes, I'm here.
Amber, you're there. I can't hear you right now, but I'll call you on your New Year's.
Okay, I'll hear from you then.
Amber, miss you. I'll see you soon.
Okay. I hope
In another call jam-packed with static and horse-pucky, not much was communicated other than the fact that he was still maintaining his lies about Europe, telling her about the large New Year's Eve crowd that had gathered at the Eiffel Tower. He called her back at 4:18, just 12 minutes before Laci's vigil was set to begin, surrounded by the crowd of 1,500 who'd gathered in the park. He stepped away from the people who'd joined together to pray and weep for his missing wife to call his girlfriend. And he finally got a good enough connection to actually hear a few things Amber said to him, though it wasn't long before the static returned and the call dropped.
Hello?
Baby?
Yes.
Amber?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can?
Yeah, hey.
Oh my goodness. What's
I found a quiet place. Pretty good, huh?
That's really good. Oh my gosh. It's like been all this crazy static and stuff. I'm like, so frustrated.
I know, I've been trying to call it. It's working. Amber?
Yes?
Amber?
Oh.
Oh, stop. Amber?
I'm right here.
Amber, are you there?
Yes.
Amber?
I can hear you.
Hey.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. I'm talking.
Okay, I'm like, stay still or something.
I know. I got to make it work.
How was your New Year's?
What's that?
How was your New Year's?
It's good. I'm just, everyone's in the bar now, so I came out of an alley. Quiet alley. Is that nice?
Yeah, it is. I could hear you. Very good.
It's pretty awesome. Fireworks and everything. The Eiffel Tower. It's people all playing American rock songs.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty funny.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you guys decided to go out. Who?
Oh, definitely.
I can never remember your friend's name. I know Jeff, but you always say, from Swan's.
Swala. And then we have Pasquale, a friend of ours from St. Joe.
Uh-huh. Oh, he's there too?
Pasquale, yeah.
Good. Did
Hi.
you make any New Year's resolutions? What was that?
Should be.
Should be?
What should my New Year's resolution be?
Oh, I don't know. That was my question. Never.
Oh, I didn't think of that. I'll tell them something good.
Yeah, you'll have to tell us. So
where are you headed?
Well, I don't. Did you get my message?
No.
You didn't get.
You leave them?
Yeah, I left you a message because I was like, oh, I hope you at least get that. But I was going to, or the San Francisco thing didn't work out, so I'm probably most likely going to go later to Sean's. Are you there? Hello? Hello? Are you there?
Scott would continue to lie to Amber about being in Europe, among other things, for another week. But it was a busy week for investigators and another week of hell for Sharon. Finding Amber and obtaining the New Year's Eve recordings marked a watershed moment for detectives, but that evening brought Sharon to her turning point with Scott as well. She'd had one of their first awkward dinners together after the vigil, but she had her first real fear that her daughter was dead just before she arrived at Scott's house. His odd behavior and irritating comments about Laci's white chairs led to Sharon spending her New Year's Eve angry and devastated, as she and a friend stayed up that night writing her first list of doubts about her son-in-law. But as Sharon agonized through the darkness on New Year's Eve about where Laci could be and whether Scott had a part in her disappearance, he and Amber were having a long conversation about their future together. It was the first real conversation they'd had since she began recording their calls for police. Amber kept a good handle on her nerves as she cheerfully greeted him Happy New Year, and they spoke for over an hour. But as she talks about their future plans, trust, commitment, New Year's resolutions, and things she's grateful for, he seems either disinterested or distracted from the conversation, as if his mind might be elsewhere, which would be understandable considering the circumstances. Although most of us probably would have skipped out on the call to our girlfriend just after our wife vanished. He sounds different on this call compared to the recordings Amber made before the vigil, as though he might be exhausted, medicated, intoxicated, and/or intentionally trying to be quiet, making much of his part of the conversation difficult to understand. They talked about Amber's daughter and whether he'd be interested in meeting Ayana's paternal grandparents. Not Brenda and Ron Frey, but Anthony Flores' parents. But the recurring theme was Amber's desire to see him more often, and she consistently tried to get him to give her a solid date when he would return home. He never did tell her exactly when he'd be back in the States, but assured her he'd be with her for her birthday, going along with her idea for a tour of the Napa Valley together at one point, and later saying he'd plan a good surprise for her to celebrate. It'd be another 2 weeks before Scott mentioned baby Connor's due date had changed from Amber's birthday on February 10th to nearly a week later on the 16th. It was confirmed by Laci's doctor that her due date actually was changed to the 16th during her last prenatal appointment on the 23rd, coming as a surprise to most who assumed it was just another one of Scott's lies. But his timing for finally mentioning the change and the way he went about telling Sharon is a little odd. As the story goes, Scott never told anyone Connor's due date changed until the 14th of January, 3 weeks into the search for Laci, and the night before Sharon learned about Amber. He'd gone well out of his way to go to Sharon's house that night, inviting himself and his sister-in-law Janie to dinner. He'd lied to Sharon about being nearby hanging flyers when he'd actually been at the police station, passing up their last offer to come clean about Amber Frey, still insisting that he hadn't been unfaithful. But the interview with detectives took longer than expected, and he arrived late, but he still made it to Sharon's that night, knowing his time was probably short with her and what her reaction would be after the affair was exposed. Indeed, it was the last time Sharon Rocha shared a space with Scott while he was still a free man, revolted and fearful at the thought of it just 24 hours later. But at the time, they were still close enough to break bread together. The evening was speckled with weird behavior from both of them, and Sharon was pissed by the time he left. But they were civil, and yet he still chose not to tell her directly about the new due date for her grandson. He told Kim Peterson instead, and only because she happened to call Sharon while he was there, asking to speak to Kim before she hung up. And then, according to Sharon, he gave her a dead-eyed glimpse into his rotten soul and gave her the silent treatment when she asked about it after. We can only wonder if he was reminded of his promise to be with Amber on her birthday as he sat with detectives that night, knowing that soon Sharon and the rest of the world would learn about his mistress. Between the media and Laci's family and friends, it wouldn't be easy to slip away to Fresno on the same day Connor was due. It seems detectives might have been prompting Amber to get Scott to commit to making plans for her birthday. They were well aware that it fell on Laci's due date, and Amber brings it up multiple times on their calls over New Year's Eve. Though it does beg the question, why wouldn't Bueller, Burkini, and Grogan have known it was changed to the 16th in the first place? It seems that'd be one of the first things they thought to ask her doctor or seek out in her medical records, which they must have had access to by mid-January. In all honesty, it's a wonder why detectives weren't the ones to tell Sharon and Kim Peterson about the date change. Kim was responsible for releasing updates to the press, notifying local hospitals to watch for a woman fitting Laci's description due to deliver on the 10th of February. It seems if investigators knew about this change, they should have shared it with the media. Share your thoughts on this in the comments. Anyway, Amber tried to get him to commit to other plans during this call as well, including Valentine's Day and Ayana's birthday. It's really best to listen to these calls for yourself, but because we can't include them here for the sake of time, I'm trying to make the full-length audio for these and other calls that need to be transcribed into a separate playlist on the channel. We'll publish them with time and date stamps along with full transcripts so that you can understand what's being said when Scott gets all whispery and weird. It's interesting to follow along with these calls as you can hear the progression of their conversation as he continued to carry on with his European farce and the evasive turn he took the instant he realized Amber learned the truth. Scott was up until the small hours of the morning on New Year's Day talking to Amber, and by sunrise Sharon Rocha hadn't slept much either. Up most of the night making her first pros and cons list about Scott, she'd refused to sleep in her own bed since Laci disappeared, not willing to allow herself the comfort or return to normalcy it signified. As horrible as the last week of 2002 had been for her, 2003 would easily become the darkest year Sharon would ever live through. And if she'd known when she met with Scott on New Year's Day that he would be the cause of the lifelong anguish she would endure every year after, she may have done more than fantasize about the violence she wished to inflict upon the monster that had taken her daughter and grandson away from her. It was January 1st when she told Scott in detail about the pieces she personally wanted to cut out of the person responsible. She might well have leapt at the chance in that room alone with him that day if she'd known what the future would bring. 2 days after Sharon's encounter with Scott on New Year's Day, Janet Isle called the tip line. She reported the affair she'd had with Scott in 1998 and left her cell phone number with one of the operators. Ablow contacted Janet soon after, and the following is an excerpt from his report. On Friday, January 3rd, 2003, at 14:48 hours, our Laci Peterson tip line received a call from Janet. Janet said she used to date Scott Peterson in 1998 when they were in college. She said Peterson was married at the time, but she didn't know it. Janet left her cell phone number in case someone wanted to call her back. Janet said Peterson was very generous with his money, frequently taking her out on dates and out to dinner. Janet lived with 2 female roommates and they were always short on money. Peterson would frequently come to their residence and bring food and gifts. On one of their first dates together, Peterson gave her 12 dozen roses, and they talked about moving in together during their dating relationship. During one night in 1998, Janet said she went to Peterson's residence late in the evening. Janet said she arrived during the early morning hours and was let in by Peterson's roommate. Janet said she went into Peterson's room and found Peterson in bed with Laci. Janet said she was extremely upset because Peterson was cheating on her with Laci. Janet said she had words with both Scott and Laci until one of Peterson's roommates escorted Janet out of the room. The roommate drove Janet home. The roommate told Janet that Laci was Peterson's wife, not his girlfriend, and Peterson had been cheating on his wife. I asked Janet if her and Peterson talked about having a family. Janet said her and Peterson had gone to a rodeo on one of their dates, and there were kids present at the rodeo. Peterson told Janet he did not want kids because they would get in the way of his lifestyle. Janet said Peterson made it clear that kids were not in his future. While Janet and Peterson dated, Peterson also stopped eating meat. That corroborates what Amber Frey told me regarding what Peterson had told her. Peterson told Frey he dated a vegetarian in college for about 6 months. Peterson told Frey he had stopped eating meat while dating that girl because the sex was great. I asked Janet about their intimate relationship. Janet said, quote, "He had issues," end quote. When I asked what Janet was talking about, and she said Peterson did some weird things at a bar after they broke up. Janet said it was only secondhand information from Peterson's roommates. However, she had heard that Peterson got real drunk and began exposing his penis in the bar. Janet said Peterson was very self-conscious about the size of his penis and whether he could please a woman. I asked Janet how sure she was Laci knew Peterson was in an intimate relationship with her. Janet said she is positive Laci knew, even though she never spoke to Laci. Janet said Laci knew because of what Janet said to Scott and Laci when she caught them in bed together. Janet made it obvious to Laci that Scott and herself were in an intimate relationship. Janet said Scott was never verbally or physically abusive towards her. That is the end of Brocchini's report. A few hours after Janet called the tip line, Scott went to Sharon's house for dinner, telling everyone at the table about the picture detectives said was supposed to be him with some girl. Sharon claims the family still had faith in Scott up until they were told about the affair, and by the 3rd of January, she was still defending him in the press. But late that night, she made another horrible list of his suspicious behavior. And the next day, as she picked up Laci's wedding ring set from the jeweler's, her son, Brent, was buying a handgun, intending to kill Scott for what he'd done to his sister. There was no mention of Brent's handgun or his brutal plans for his brother-in-law until the sentencing phase of the trial, when he read his victim impact statement to the jury, saying, quote, "I knew that immediately, when Laci went missing, that you were responsible. On January 4th, 2003, I went and bought a gun. I already knew at that point in time you were guilty. I chose not to kill you myself for one reason. So you would have to sweat it out and not take the easy way out. I'm grateful I made the right decision." End quote. But while Brent was downtown buying a handgun with a mind to take his death sentence into his own hands, Scott was 20 miles west of the city, irritating Officer Applegate at the roadblock and interrupting the scent dogs working along the highway. His parents were in Modesto that afternoon, though, attending their first post-press conference meeting with law enforcement, managing to piss off Sharon and Police Chief Roy Wasden by the end of it. His father, Lee, irritated Wasden by asking just how long it would be before police stopped investigating his son. When the chief told him they planned to follow the evidence and hoped to have things wrapped up soon, Lee responded by saying, "Thank God, then we can go home." Scott also had a relatively long talk with Amber that night, and you can find their full conversation posted in a separate playlist on the channel. On the 5th of January, an article came out in the Modesto Bee with a statement from Sergeant Ron Cloward that gave even more precise information about where Scott fished that day. It reads as follows, quote, "Peterson told police that he launched his aluminum boat at the marina, then went northwest and fished around Brooks Island." End quote. January 6th was a busy day for detectives and a rough one for Amber, but they'd worked together to make it a bit of both for Scott. Police followed him in a rental car on one of his weird trips to Berkeley that morning, and he drove like a madman to shake them off his trail on his way back to town, having no idea that Amber was on her way to Modesto as well. She had traveled north to work with a profiler from the Department of Justice over the next few days. It seems detectives weren't learning much from listening to Scott talk about his fictional travels and poetry. They needed to get him talking about Laci, and the only way to do that was to put an end to his ridiculous trip to Europe. Detectives Grogan and Bueller worked closely with Amber and Agent Hagen from the DOJ to coach her through the calls with Scott over the next 2 days, in an attempt to bring his missing wife into the conversation with hopes of hearing something that might help them find her. The first step was to ramp up the pressure from Amber to get him to come clean about Laci and her disappearance. Eliciting a confession about where she was could come later. They gambled that if they put enough stress on Scott by leaving just a few short hours before Amber learned the truth about Laci from someone else, Scott would try to get ahead of it in order to preserve his reputation. Agent Hagen's plan eventually worked, but as always, Scott tried to evade the conversation first. At the mere mention of trouble from Amber, he buys himself some time with more static and dropped calls before finally telling her some real truth about his wife. At 11:02 p.m. on the 6th of January, Scott admitted he wasn't a widower living in Sacramento, but that his wife had very much been alive and nearly ready to have his baby in Modesto, or at least she had been, up until she coincidentally vanished 2 weeks before. But Agent Hagen helps Amber string Scott along in order to get him into a bit of a corner before he gives up on his Paris trip and his wifeless, dogless life in Sacramento and starts spinning the truth about what's happening in Modesto instead. He told her he wanted to tell her about Laci long before she vanished, but that he didn't want to add to Amber's stress and drama that she already had going on in her life. Knowing she'd recently had a bad fight with her sister, he thoughtfully decided not to burden her with the truth. And he was only protecting Amber with his lies after Laci disappeared as well, with only a thought for shielding her and Ayanna from the aggressive media. Of course, he lied and lied and lied, but he'd done it all for her, really. He cautioned her against reading the deception that had been printed about him in the press, and he made sure to explain to Amber that there were different types of loss. How could he help it if she made the assumptions when he told her he lost his wife? Again, you have to listen to these phone calls for yourself, and of course, we've included the transcripts so you can follow along at home as Scott carts his horseshit back across the pond from Europe. Amber was still with Grogan, Bueller, and Hagen when she called Scott a little after 4 p.m. on the 7th. It was another long conversation, and we won't go through all the details here, but at one point Amber asked how Laci's parents were handling her disappearance. He said it was awful, and that he was worried about his mother-in-law. He claimed Sharon was on Xanax or some other depressant that made her seem emotionless. Amber told him that those types of drugs don't do that, and he just kind of says, well, that's what it looks like. And then he tells her he's got to go so he can meet with the police chief about Laci. Whether he really had a meeting with Chief Wasden that afternoon is unknown, but we do know that Sharon hosted him and his parents for dinner that night. So just a few hours after he'd told Amber that his mother-in-law seemed indifferent and flat, Sharon witnessed the one and only display of big emotion she saw from Scott since Laci vanished, although it was more to do with himself than with his missing wife. He'd leapt up and began stalking around, yelling at the TV and threatening to sue after an expert on Fox News implied he was guilty. Whether or not Sharon was on medication, eventually, it became very clear to her that Scott didn't need Xanax to kill his emotions after Laci's disappearance. During another long conversation on the 8th, Scott questioned whether Amber might actually be involved with his wife going missing. And he also told her he had no concerns about her going to the police if that's what she felt was right. At one point, she sarcastically asked him his best guess about how the world would see him after his lies and their relationship came out in the press. On the 9th, Scott made another trip to Berkeley, where he didn't talk to anybody, and left 2 minutes later, traveling to Bakersfield directly after. It was there, in the DoubleTree Hotel, where Scott heard the news that police had spotted a possible body on their sonar, but that they couldn't retrieve it. Scott hadn't spoken to Amber that day, but the next time he did, he told her he had plans to do an interview with the local radio show on the 10th, but that the media intensity and threats of violence from the public had ramped up so high after that announcement, Kim Peterson advised him not to participate. An interesting thing to note here is that at the time of Scott's arrest, months later, he has a partially written letter to Amber Frey written on the stationery from the DoubleTree Hotel in Bakersfield. The wiretap on Scott's house and cell phones was approved on the morning of the 10th, and he mailed Amber and Ayanna's picture back to Fresno that afternoon. He'd been carrying their photo in his wallet to keep them close since they'd parted ways nearly a month before, Investigators began capturing the audio from their wiretap on the 11th, just in time to document him lying to half a dozen people about his whereabouts as the dive teams went back in the water to retrieve this mysterious object they'd spotted on sonar 2 days before. And they recorded what they thought was a relieved whistle from Scott as he listened to the message from Sharon, telling him it wasn't his wife, but an anchor that they'd found on the seafloor.
You have one unheard message. First message. Hi, Scott. This is Mom. It's about 1:45. Just wanted to know, I just got a call from Ron Cloward. He's at Marino, and it was a boat anchor. Of course, we knew it wasn't Laci, but I just wanted you to know. I'm going to call your house in case you don't get this message first. Bye. Message erased.
After returning to Modesto from his various travels that day, he took down the Christmas lights and unwrapped the table saw and other gifts that Laci'd left him under the Christmas tree. And Sharon should have been with her daughter that night, taking down streamers and cleaning up paper plates and gushing over Connor's gifts. She was supposed to bring the cake for Laci's baby shower that day, but instead found herself feeling grateful that they hadn't dredged her daughter up out of the bay that day. And when she compared her important dates with Amber just a couple of weeks later, Sharon didn't have to tell her that Laci's baby shower was planned on the 11th because Scott already had when they talked on the 12th. No longer having to pretend he was in Europe and not a massive lying turd, she began to express more anger with him, and she calls out more of his lies with each phone call. She certainly wasn't pleased to hear that he mailed her picture back to her either. He tells her that he assumed she wouldn't want him to have it anymore and felt like he didn't deserve to keep it, especially the picture of her toddler Ayana. He said he felt so guilty for his lies, he wasn't worthy of keeping it, even though he really wanted to, which made Amber snap back with, well, obviously not. At some point, he told her he'd been getting some weird phone calls lately as well, beyond the normal threats and harassment he'd become used to. The calls all came from the same person, at the same time in the dead of night for the past week. His phone would ring at 2 a.m. like clockwork, and the caller would always be crying as they screamed the same message into his ear. Scott Peterson, you killed her, and you're going to kill your mom now. She's on oxygen. You need to come clean so you don't kill your mom. Scott may have been a little rattled by these calls because his mother Jackie had actually gone into the emergency room the day before, vomiting and overwhelmed by stress. He couldn't tell if the person was male or female, but whoever it was called him again the night before, but with a drastically different message. The caller was half an hour late this time too, and when Scott answered the phone at 2:30 a.m., they said, quote, I'm sorry I blamed you. You had nothing to do with this. I'm so sorry this happened. End quote. Amber didn't say much about the weird phone calls other than doubting whether he really didn't know who it was, and she didn't comment on his mom's visit to the emergency room either, jumping right back into confronting him about his lies. That might seem a little cold-hearted, but Amber had a job to do. Law enforcement provided her with a list of topics and questions that they wanted her to broach with Scott, and she consistently tried to steer him back to those areas, constantly pressing him for more information. But it seems the detectives working the case began to doubt Amber and her motivations as well, believing eventually that she wanted to continue a relationship with Scott and questioning whether she might lie for him, or even conspire with him to hide evidence. They held a meeting on the 13th of January to discuss conversations Amber thought weren't being documented because she hadn't recorded them. But unbeknownst to Amber, police had her phones tapped as well, and they heard every word. Investigator Stephen Jacobson wrote the following in his report, quote, Detective Bueller stated that he had talked with Amber Frey and asked her if she had heard from Scott Peterson. Amber Frey said she had not. Detective Bueller stated that he did not reveal to her that he had intercepted several conversations between the two of them. Obviously, Amber Frey is no longer telling us the truth in this investigation. and judging by Scott's question to her in call A above, I suspect she may be disseminating information to Scott Peterson concerning what law enforcement knows about this investigation. End quote. Jacobson was still suspicious of Amber in February of the following year when he took the stand at the preliminary hearing, saying, quote, "I'm not calling the lady a liar. I'm just saying I was suspecting the fact that some of my information that I had didn't quite jibe with the information that was being told to me by the detective." End quote. This issue of Amber's secret phone calls wasn't addressed until that fall during the middle of Scott's trial, just before she was scheduled to testify. Scott's defense attorney, Mark Garagos, passed John Bueller a note in the hallway of the courthouse, asking where he could find the calls that Jacobson referred to in his report. At that time, it was determined that the whole thing about Amber and the secret calls was just a big misunderstanding. Jacobson, Bueller, Albrocchini, and the 2 DEA agents who'd listened to and timestamped those calls in January of 2003 determined that they'd been mistaken. Bueller wrote up a 2-page analysis explaining the mistake, submitted it to the court, and that was the end of it, at least officially. But detectives weren't the only ones who suspected Amber was holding back information during the investigation. So let's take a minute here to introduce Matt Dalton. Matt Dalton was an investigator for the defense who began working on the case in April of 2003, just after Scott's arrest. And we'll talk a bit more about Ava Frey, who is Amber's older sister. It seems Amber and Ava had a rocky relationship since childhood, and it only seems to have deteriorated since then. Ava and their mother Brenda were still a big part of Amber's life when she met Scott Peterson. But after learning how they met and how little she'd seen of him since their first date, Ava and Brenda immediately suspected he was probably married. Ava said that Amber's poor relationship choices had become a pattern by then, and that she could see signs of another disaster on the horizon as she gushed about Scott. Their father Ron was a little less harsh, describing his youngest daughter's sour luck with men, saying she's a wonderful person who just seems to step in trouble a lot. But her affair with Scott turned out to be more than just a puddle of trouble for Amber, and on the 15th of August, as evidence was compiled for Scott's defense, her sister Ava brought her poodle to the lobby of the Doubletree Hotel to sit for an interview with Matt Dalton. When it comes to Amber Frey, Dalton doesn't pull many punches in his book, telling readers that there are 2 camps when it comes to Amber, and neither is neutral. People either see her as a heroine who'd had enough courage to come forward and bring Scott Peterson down, or as, quote, tabloid fodder, a wannabe actress/model who'd been around the block and fell too soon for yet another married man, end quote, and ouch. Though Dalton does attempt to give her credit for her testimony, it's clear he doesn't see Amber as much more than a fling for Scott, certainly not a threat to his marriage, and far from a motive for murder. There's more to come from Dalton in a future episode, but it's his interview with Ava Frey that's relevant to Amber's conduct and the potential dishonesty surrounding her calls with Scott. Ava held her poodle in her lap as she told Dalton that her little sister refused to let her look at the scripted questions she'd received from law enforcement, which is understandable. But she also said that Amber told her directly about the tapes that she never handed over to police. What's more, she also implied that Amber knew Scott was married long before his wife had gone missing. As we discussed, Ava and her mother Brenda were convinced early on that Amber's new boyfriend was likely married. In fact, Ava said they were so convinced that they hired a private investigator to look into Scott. Of course, as we'll find with much of what we'll hear from Matt Dalton, this is a dead end. No PI has ever been associated with Amber or her family, and no solid evidence exists to back up Ava's claim. It doesn't make much sense for Dalton to fabricate the PI claim, but Ava, on the other hand, may have had some motive for throwing her sister under the bus. The two didn't share the closest sisterly bond to begin with, but it seems that the Scott situation may have ramped up the drama between them to another level. Amber described a pretty heated argument between the two of them in mid-January, right around the time detectives suspected they might not be able to trust her, believing Amber wanted to pursue a relationship with Scott Peterson. In another twist, the altercation between her and her sister started with Ayanna, but it quickly bled over into Ava's search for Laci. Amber left her daughter with Ava over the 3 days that she spent in Modesto as she worked with Agent Hagen to get Scott to admit that he was married to a missing woman. But when she got back to Fresno to pick Ayanna up, Ava wasn't home and she wasn't answering her phone. This sent Amber into a frantic rush to her mother's house, where she found Ayanna safe and sound with her grandma. Her sister wasn't there, but Amber was ready to give her a piece of her mind for not calling to tell her about the change of plans, and she was still fuming when Ava walked in. She was covered in mud, and Amber only had to look at her to know her sister had been out searching for Laci. She screamed at Ava, saying, "How could you and how dare you?" apparently furious that she'd involved herself in the case. While it may have been an awkward thing to have to explain if Ava had actually found anything, Amber's reaction seems a little odd, unless we're missing something. Amber actually told Scott about the fight with Ava as well, leaving out the part about searching for Laci, of course. She told him Ayanna had a diaper rash when she got her back, and that she had no desire to see her sister again for a long time. On the 15th, Scott had another long chat with Amber, while Sharon held ice on her swollen hand, wondering if it might be broken. But after learning about Scott's affair from detectives earlier that evening, her heart ached far more than her hand. She'd had a few hours to calm down since punching the wall in a frustrated rage after returning home from the police station, but as her anger resided, helplessness began to take its place, and Ron called family and friends to the house to help Sharon cope. It wasn't long after when Sharon made a call to Kim Peterson to have the volunteer center permanently closed. She knew it would be an absolute circus with the media, especially with Scott hanging around. And what was the point, now that everyone knew that he killed her? The National Enquirer ran the scandalous photos the next morning as Detective Grogan went to Sharon's house to install a recording device on her phone. Although she told him she didn't expect to hear from Scott, not now that the affair was made public. But she was wrong, and he called with impeccable timing again, just after the recording device was installed. Sharon was unprepared and flustered, but she did well at keeping a lid on her anger as they spoke. For a while they went back and forth about the volunteer center, with Sharon pretending she didn't know why they were closed. Probably sensing something was up and knowing the pictures were all over the news, he nonchalantly asked her how she was doing. She told him it had been a rough day, and still looking for a way to get to the heart of it and confront him, she danced around a little bit longer before finally asking if he was seeing someone. He said no, but he did acknowledge the photos existed and wanted to sit down and discuss it with her. Exasperated, she said, "So, you're trying to tell me you're not seeing somebody else? There are pictures of you kissing another woman." He didn't give her an answer, but when he said he was coming over so they could talk about it, her irritation vanished and her heart began to race. She didn't want to see him, and she was only talking to him to get information about Laci. Detectives initially wanted her to wear a wire around Scott, but Sharon made it clear she didn't want to be around Scott. He'd broken her heart with his betrayal, ruined her family by taking Laci and Connor from her, and terrified her now that she knew he was a murderer. If he could do that to Laci, what's to stop him from killing her too? She quickly told Scott she would find out why the volunteer center was closed and let him know, but that it wasn't a good idea for him to come to her house. But just after Sharon hung up, she overheard Bueller tell Grogan that Scott was heading their way. Sharon had no idea how he knew this because she wasn't aware of the GPS tracker, but she was terrified considering what he would do when he got there. A few moments later, the doorbell rang, scaring the death out of her, and before the detectives could react, her friend Sandy had already opened the door. Of course, it wasn't Scott, but another friend named Bonnie Hurst, who'd stopped by to check on Sharon. After a while, they were fairly certain Scott wasn't coming, but the GPS showed that he did get close. They assumed that he might have driven by without stopping, perhaps spooked by the cars that sat outside. But Sharon wondered what he would have done if the detectives' cars hadn't been there. She was officially scared of Scott now. Recalling the dead-eyed stare he'd given her 2 days before, she felt he was unpredictable, unstable, and dangerous. She had taken refuge in her bed, wailing and mourning for Laci and Connor for hours after Grogan and Bueller left, but in an instant her sobbing shifted to rage. Sharon leapt out of the bed, startling Ron as she stormed to the kitchen to call Scott.
Scott?
Yeah.
Where are you?
I just loaded up all the stuff for the LA Command Center.
Oh.
Just left the volunteer center. I gave a couple interviews to the press and then...
Well, since you've managed to lose all of my confidence in you, what I want to know is where's my daughter?
I wish I knew, Mom. I wish I knew where she is.
Yeah, you do know. You do know where she is, and I want you to tell me, where is Laci and her baby? Where did you put them?
Where is my wife and our child? I don't know.
You killed my daughter, didn't you?
No, I didn't, Mom.
Yes, you did, Scott, and I want to know. Just let me bring my daughter home, okay? That's all I want. I don't want anything else from you. I want you to tell me where my daughter is. I want to be able to bury my daughter. Now would you tell me where she is?
Don't know where she is. I want my wife...
Stop lying. I'm tired of your lies. You have looked me in the eye for weeks and been lying to me. You've looked me in the eye for years and been lying to me and to Laci. Now where is she?
If I wish I knew.
You don't know. Stop lying. For once in your life, take some responsibility and tell the goddamn truth. Where is my daughter?
I want her home, Mom.
Shut up. Don't tell me such stupid things. You tell me where she is. Where'd you put her? Scott, tell me where she is.
I'm sorry.
And you can run away. You can go do whatever the fuck you want. But you tell me where my daughter is.
I'm sorry.
I have every right to know where you put Laci.
We all have a right to know where Laci...
Quit lying to me. Don't bullshit me. You tell me where she is.
We all want her home.
Shut up. You are such a fucking liar. You make me sick, Scott. Where is Laci? Tell me where Laci is. I want to be able to bury my daughter. Now tell me what you did with her.
I want her and our child home.
Oh, shut up. You're disgusting. Do you know there's not a person in this town who wants to see your face? Now you tell me where she is and then you can get the hell out of here. Tell me where she is. I want my daughter, Scott. That's all I want from you. I don't care what happens to you.
Mom, we all want her back.
Oh God, you're disgusting. Do you have anything to say to him?
If you've got anything left in you, Scott, you better tell us where she is.
I wish I knew, Ron. We all want her back.
No, the police are gonna be seeing you before long, Scott, and your world is crumbling.
My world is done without Laci and my child. We all want her back, and I'm sorry that you guys feel I had something to do with it. But the only important thing is getting her back.
Scott, I don't know how you can just keep saying. We've seen pictures, we've seen other things, so, you're in trouble. We want her back.
We all want her back. There's no question to that. We need to find her and Connor.
I've had enough of this. I don't want to talk to you anymore. You tell us where Laci is.
Sharon was spot on when she told him there wasn't a resident now left in Modesto who wanted to see his face, and we'll get into some of the ways people in the community made him aware of it in a moment. But Laci's brother Brent also called Scott that afternoon.
Hello.
Hey Brent, Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah, trying to find the Inquirer, but I couldn't, so I don't know exactly what this article says, but the most important thing obviously from, when you called this morning is, it's...
Has anyone brought it up to your attention?
What's that?
Has anyone else brought it up to your attention?
The article?
Yeah.
Just Mom, and then I was wondering why there was a sign that the center was closed today when I was there this morning. And I tried to call some people, but I talked to Terry and found out.
Yeah, well apparently there's pictures of you and the girl.
Yeah.
Together. So we know that's true, right?
Yeah, there was an encounter.
Okay, so knowing that, what can you tell me about my sister to make me understand that you're telling the truth and that I can still support you?
Yeah, I know that how happy we were together, and that, never changed or wavers.
Right?
And I don't know if you can believe me. I certainly hope you can. I hope you know me well enough, but
I want.
We're looking for her and we need to find her and...
Yeah.
I'm obviously devastated, and I had nothing to do with her disappearance and it's hard too.
Yeah, and you think that girl...
I can help the media, but I can't lose, the rest of my family?
And do you think that girl had something to do with it?
No, she didn't.
She didn't?
No, she couldn't have. She didn't know about Laci.
Okay. And then obviously there's no financial motive with the life insurance because you're not gonna be able to collect on that, right?
I don't know. I hadn't thought of it.
Okay.
I guess not. Yeah, I don't care.
So then I'm just trying to understand. My point of view is your motive. I mean, like, were you happy to have this baby coming?
Oh, absolutely, Connor. Come on. You know that.
Okay.
I mean, that would be wonderful.
Then, because it looks like they're out to nail you right now.
Oh, of course they are.
And we've been standing up for you.
I know it.
And now I feel like I don't know what to believe, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
well, it's
because look, the article says there's blood spots on the kitchen floor, blood spots in your truck, I think. It talks about the woman who ever called the Modesto Police. It talks about a large life insurance policy. And then they talk about cement in your, shop that's used for, I don't know, anchors or something.
Yeah, I made a boat anchor with some cement and then I put some in the driveway here. Yeah.
So they're just piecing all this together?
Piecing together.
Circumstantial?
Well, there's the cement, yeah. The police have asked me a lot about that.
Okay, so they've already asked you about this stuff?
What's that?
The police has already asked you about this stuff?
Oh yeah, and I've never heard about these blood spots or anything like that. You can look on, when they serve the warrant here.
Yeah.
And they give you an itemized list of everything?
They
do mention that they had one suspected blood spot on an exterior door that turned out negative.
Okay.
So if that helps you know how unfactual this article is in a lot of respects.
Hey, it's coming from the Inquirer, so you know what I mean. Who knows what this thing?
Yeah, I was looking at the Inquirer of the 21st article.
Yeah, I read that too. Today is the first day I've ever read any of this stuff.
Yeah, but it's embarrassing and wrong.
And then it said something about...
And it talked about this encounter with this girl.
Okay, so that part is true, huh?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, well, so you don't. No, I understand. I'm not, saying anything. But, it's one thing not to be happy, but it's another thing to, do something to someone that...
Laci and I are happy together.
Huh?
Laci and I are happy together.
Every time I saw you, I told you, Scott, the day after she left she loved you so much and she totally adored you. She had always had positive.
We both did.
Yeah, what do you think happened?
I'm thinking about what kind of father I was gonna be. It was gonna be great.
Now, okay, is there anything else like this person, this woman? Is there anything else out there that might throw us off, catch us off guard?
This brings up, I'm just trying,
because if I'm gonna go out there and talk.
I'm thinking about other relationships, but those were before we were married.
Okay.
This was the only thing like that.
Okay, alright. Now what's the deal with this basket? You were supposed to pick up a basket for my grandfather?
Yeah, Vela Farms, yeah.
Yeah, and it's somewhat of an issue. Can you just clear that up for me?
Yeah, well if I remember right they were closing at 3:30.
Yeah.
So I called Laci when I knew I wasn't gonna be back and left a message here and on her mobile phone and asked her to get it.
Okay.
'Cause I told Amy the night before that I would get it.
Okay.
Amy went out there and bought it and they didn't have it ready in time.
Alright.
And I don't remember if I called Amy on her cell phone, but I don't think I did.
Well, this is just the National Enquirer. It doesn't sound like any of the other news media picked up on this. But it seems like there's a lot of detailed things in here. I don't know where they got their information from, and some of the stuff like the life insurance. How's the Enquirer gonna find out about that?
Yeah, and you asked, and if you want to talk to, our financial guy?
Oh, no. You know what I'm just saying is how in the heck are they finding this stuff out?
Shit. This stuff can be found. How many alien stories are in there?
I know. It's probably half-truths.
But I did get a call from, I guess Channel 3 regarding that article so.
Oh, they already called? The media's gonna be back in town?
Yeah, and fuck that's good.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll get more down that way because.
I know.
If it brings her back.
Okay, well I appreciate you talking to me because I was concerned, I'm probably going on a roller coaster like everyone else.
Yeah.
So that Laci's still going on and everything.
Well I'm gonna go back to the center and get some stuff today.
Okay.
Get ready to go on down there. I'm worried how this is gonna, obviously it's gonna, it hurts everyone at the center.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's closed.
So I won't be welcome there, but I still want to go down there and open it up and work.
Yeah.
And do everything so.
Yeah, I don't doubt.
I'll do anything to get her back so.
I would love to have her back. Scott, I miss her dearly.
Yeah, I want to get her back.
I don't care where she's at right now. I want her back one way or the other.
That's the way I am.
So you can tell me honestly, okay, I asked you earlier this morning.
Yeah.
You had nothing to do with this?
I had nothing to do with her disappearance, Brent.
Okay.
I wish I knew where she was.
I mean, sorry to question ya, but if I'm gonna go up and stand up there and talk, I need to know, the facts so I don't look like an idiot.
This should not have happened.
So who was out at the center? Anyone?
This morning I was with Don the chaplain and Joan.
Don and Joan?
Yeah.
And Terry wasn't there?
No, because someone called Terry last night at 10 o'clock and told her it was going to be closed. I assumed that was Kim Peterson.
Oh, okay.
And I opened it up. I had no idea and
I think it's the article, that's why.
Yeah, that's what I understand. That's what Terry told me.
Okay.
That they didn't want to get hit with all the media, so.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be flooded down there. Was there media down there already?
No, there's none here at the house or anything either.
Okay.
But I can imagine they're on their way.
Yeah.
But God, one bright thing is they were kinda bugging out on us, so.
I know.
Things were back for a week or two.
Now are you gonna talk to the media at all? I mean, because I know we talked about it before and you were gonna use it as a tactic.
Yeah, my thing is when it's necessary.
Okay.
And that's why I've been calling them on the phone and stuff to keep them interested. Yeah, I called them all yesterday.
Okay.
To tell them about LA, and they asked me, are you gonna be there? I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. Well, will you talk to us? I said, well, probably. And so they're like, okay, we'll want cameras.
Oh, right on, good.
And I tell them all about San Diego as well, and their questions, are you gonna be there? Yeah, I'll be there. So they're sending crews.
Okay.
So that's working out.
Okay. You know what, Scott, this is gonna hit hard. This article is not very positive.
I can take the hits, if we can get her back.
Yeah.
I don't care.
I mean, what do you think happened to her? Because you know what, I have no idea. First I thought the burglary, then I was thinking, and then I went down to the park and, I just don't understand do you have any thoughts?
No, the only thing.
Did you guys have any enemies at the business or anything? I know you guys mentioned a pool guy.
Yeah, but I can't see him doing this. A dispute over.
$1,000.
$800 or something. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
The only two things I have, ideas, are still the robbery, they're gonna bring that up, right?
Yeah.
And just someone that knew her routine and when she was coming back from the park or just leaving the house.
Okay.
Just pulled over and grabbed her, or down at the park. I guess that's a possibility too.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's keep in touch, so we can keep on the same page and all that.
Absolutely. Have you talked to your mom today?
Yeah, I'm over her house now.
Oh, are you?
She's not here. She's not doing so hot about the girl thing. She's pretty upset about that.
I know.
So,
she doesn't need that. God.
Huh?
I don't know what to say.
There's probably nothing to say right now,
Yeah.
There's a lot of motive going on. If I was an attorney, I would say, the life insurance, this other woman, they could say the baby, there's just so many variables here.
Sure.
I just can't imagine someone hurting someone over any of one of those. A divorce can take place, you can just leave, you don't have to hurt someone
Definitely.
So it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, are you taking off tomorrow?
I think so.
Yeah, okay, alright. Well, then you'll be back when? Saturday or Sunday?
I'll be back Sunday night.
Sunday night? Okay, then maybe Monday we can get together or something.
Yeah, that will be good.
Okay, Scott.
Thanks, Brent.
Brent took a much more mellow tone with Scott than his mother had when they spoke that afternoon, especially considering he'd been certain about his guilt and planning to shoot Scott since buying a gun 2 weeks before. But that was on Thursday, the 16th of January, and although Brent made plans at the end of that call to talk with Scott again the following Monday, what he had to say couldn't wait that long. Brent called Scott back the next day with a different tone. Unfortunately, we don't even have the full transcript of this call. The recording seems to have picked up in the middle and dropped off before they ended the conversation, but we'll listen to the portion that we do have.
Yeah.
None of it's true.
Scott.
I'll give you the documents to show you.
No, I don't need doc. If you told me you did something, it's my word against yours. So you know what? I think you would tell me something if something happened, but I don't really give a what happened now. It's too late. Whatever's done is done. If you did something, or someone else did something, it's done. You can't take it back, even if we wanted to take it back.
Right.
You know, I just want my sister back.
I do too. I want Laci and my baby back.
Yeah, but you know a lot of things are. The way it's being portrayed is, it's you.
I know it.
It's you. And the evidence is really stacking up against you. I talked to Susan last night. Did you get a chance to talk to her?
No.
Okay, well, we just talked a little bit about what was out in the papers and you know, I'm sure your family is supporting you, but I think they're starting to have doubts too. They were surprised to hear about the affair, so I dunno. I mean, Scott, if you did it, you know you're not gonna get away with it. You know that, right?
Of course not. No.
So I mean, are we gonna just play this game out, or what? What's the plan here?
Brent, I didn't do anything.
Okay.
It's that simple. We need to find her.
Yeah,
I mean, I can understand your suspicion, but you know I understand your suspicion of me, but hey, we gotta keep the center open. We gotta find her. God ain't important to me right now.
Okay, I mean, you know what shocks me, Scott, is you sending my sister to a Christmas party by herself, while you're out with the other girl at a Christmas party down there. You know that disturbs me, and I lose trust in you. It doesn't show me you're being honest. I mean, you had to know that was gonna come out, but you still didn't admit to it. So that means it shows me that you're trying to get away with this. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. Hey,
It's fair to say that by this point the family was done supporting Scott, now having both Sharon and Brent directly accuse him. But he has a much more emotional reaction when Amber merely implied that he was involved when they spoke later that day. As she had him go over the timeline with Laci during their last hours together, he begins to cry when he realizes she thinks he's involved, something he comes nowhere near doing on the calls with Laci's mother or her brother, as they beg him for answers, clearly assuming she's already dead. Ron and Sharon couldn't have been more right when they told Scott he was no longer welcome in Modesto and that his world would crumble before long. The media was still flashing clips of his smiles and laughter at the New Year's Eve vigil when his photos with Amber hit the tabloids, and the backlash was heavy, to say the least. In fact, just a week before Amber made her statement to the press, one particularly angry resident ran his truck into Scott's office at the warehouse, but Scott wasn't there at the time. He'd been harassed out of his home by this time as well, staying in hotels and carrying most of his belongings with him in his truck. And Sharon was getting calls at home from people offering to kill Scott for her, but of course, she turned them down. Shortly after the incident at the warehouse, his mother, Jackie, suggested he move in with his sister, Ann Bird, out near Berkeley. This was on the 19th of January, and his time with Ann is a whole nother thing that we'll get into next time, but suffice it to say, there's a lot of drama, and there's a lot of wine involved. So during the week leading up to Amber Frey's press conference, Kristen Dempwolf and Diane Jackson were hypnotized with the goal of generating new leads for the search effort for Laci, but nothing developed from the attempt aside from both of their testimonies becoming inadmissible at trial. We'll recall that Kristen said that she saw Scott in the bed of his truck that morning and bid him good day, and Diane Jackson saw the van on the lawn in front of the Medina house, but the hypnosis sessions prevented the jury from hearing from either one of them. Sometime during this week, Scott went on record saying the National Enquirer article was all lies, and during an interview with Modesto reporter Gloria Gomez, he claimed he'd said that before actually reading it. And he also claimed that he didn't know the photos had been printed with it, but both of those things are rather hard to believe.
The past month has been pretty.
That's been absolutely terrible, as it is for everyone. I mean, you see us in press conference. You haven't seen me as much in the media, but you see our families and the raw emotions out there and the grief, the frustration. You know, we go through a range of emotions from anger to frustration to grief. For me, it comes at different times during the day. 2 weeks ago, I knew exactly what to do. I'd go to the volunteer center at the Red Lion and open up the center and wait for the volunteers to come and work on things. And then I'd go out and put up flyers. I knew exactly what to do, and that was going to bring Laci home. And now I don't know exactly what to do, and that's so frustrating. That's the hardest part. I mean, we have a core group of volunteers still working. to get her picture out there nationally through corporations and organizations and obviously media and other means. So we continue to work tirelessly, many people do, to bring her home. And we can do that during the day. And unfortunately at night, don't know what to do when the grief hits, and it's unbearable. But you also have to recognize that Laci is hurting worse than any of us. She's the one that's not with our family. She's the one that we need to find and bring home.
I know you have
so that gives you focus. It gives you, there are times when you just can't continue, and you're driving, you have to pull over and stop. And if you're doing something, you just can't continue. Try to stay busy and have a task, to know what to do, a positive task, and try to focus on that.
I know that there are certain areas you can't go to. It's hard to go to the park.
It's hard to go to. It's important though, because in the mornings when down there alone, I feel closer to her. Maybe that's an attempt to communicate or something. Yeah.
And you mentioned right off the start that you haven't been in the media.
No. It was the first 3 days or so when she disappeared. It was an absolute privacy issue. Not showing the grief of our family, not explaining that. After that, it was a conscious decision to remain out of the media eye, decided upon by everyone in the family and the volunteers, in order to, and I'm sorry to say it to media, but to keep the media here, to keep them hungry for, an interview with me or a picture, so that they would keep coming back, so this story won't fall through the cracks as it has happened with other missing people, with other abductions. And it's up to the family to keep that going. So we made that conscious decision together. So I wouldn't speak. Obviously, we did lots of media with the rest of the family. And to keep them here, I didn't. But unfortunately now, the suspicions of me have grown so great due to people, wondering what happened to the inappropriate relationship that I had with Amber Frey, that it's necessary to speak. It's appropriate time to, in order to ask people to keep looking for Laci, because they're not looking for Laci as much as they should be right now.
Let's talk about some of those suspicions, because there are a lot of suspicions out there. I think people want to know, first of all, why would you leave Laci, who was 8.5 months pregnant, alone to go fishing on Christmas Eve?
Okay. Our day was planned for, Christmas Eve dinner at our mom's house. Preparations were all made, gifts done. Laci was simply going to be baking that day. And it's not uncommon for us to, simply, we have separate pursuits. She does not, play golf as I do, which was my other option for that day. And being, 7.5 months pregnant, she's not going to want to go out in a boat. But it's simply a leisure activity to pursue that day. And, was what our plans were. It may not be everyone's choice to do things like that, but it's the way that our relationship works.
I know when I approached you on Amber Frey, I told you that I would be reporting that you had a girlfriend.
Right.
Your response to me is that you had no comment either way. Why didn't you just come clean then?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question. It simply, wasn't appropriate to comment on it. And unfortunately, there has been a statement in the press that I denied it, which was made with another reporter when I characterized a National Enquirer article as a pack of lies. And I did so without reading the article, unfortunately. The article I thought to include, I know also included a supposed life insurance policy, supposed blood evidence, and I forget what else, but also included the report of Amber. So I called it a pack of lies, not knowing that she was in there. So it's just not important to comment about that. I'm glad that Amber came forward You want me to turn that off?
Yeah, what is that?
That's my phone, unfortunately. I thought it was off. And I'll just answer that question again. Somewhere here. Yeah, it's kind of going crazy, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, so if you just want to ask your question again, I'll just...
So, once again, if you can just talk about why didn't you just come forward at the time when I asked you if you had a girlfriend? Why didn't you just come clean then?
Right. At that time, it wasn't appropriate to comment about because it's not relevant. And I'm glad you asked it because there were reports that I denied it. When I characterized a National Enquirer article as a pack of lies that included, unknowing to me, I knew that the article included this supposed life insurance policy bought this summer, supposed blood evidence, and other strange reports like taking the floors out of our home. And I didn't know it included, this relationship that I had. So I characterized it as a pack of lies, and that's come out as a denial, it was never intended to be. I simply approached that issue as it's not relevant, and there's no reason to comment about it. There's a reason to comment about the number. Now, I'm glad that Amber did the press conference. I'm glad that she came forward because it allows lots of people, I believe, to start looking for Laci again because it's slacked off because of that, because there's suspicion about me.
She claims you deceived her. She claims
Amber.
that, yeah.
Yes, she did not know. She did not know that I was married. That is correct. So I'm glad she came forward. I informed her that I am married, and of Laci's disappearance shortly after, Christmas Eve. It was a couple of days after Christmas Eve. I don't know the exact date. I'm glad she did the press conference. I'm glad that's out there. It had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance.
Your stomach must have been turning, though, when you see her go on television, and it's national. And here's this girl saying, he lied to me. He told me he was single.
Sure.
I mean, your stomach must have been turning.
You know what is a positive to allow us to go on to search for Laci? That's how I view it, and that's how I felt about it.
The Rocha family
I said, good, this will be done. We can keep looking for Laci.
Now, Laci's family says they can no longer trust you.
Mm-hmm. It was unfair and inappropriate for me to have that relationship.
How do you feel, though, that, the Rocha family says they can't trust you?
They're wonderful people, the Rocha family. I know that, we all have love between us. And I know that we'll all keep searching for Laci. And, I told Laci about the relationship. She knew about it, and it's important between us. And we'll continue to search for her and bring her home.
That's another problem people had a big issue with. A lot of Laci's family talked to me and friends saying, if Laci knew that you were having an affair, she would have said something to someone. She wouldn't have kept quiet about it.
I don't know if she mentioned it to anyone or not. I did see a report in the news, an interview with a friend of ours, Lori, that indicated that she did not believe that I had told Laci. Lori also said, I know Scott, and he had nothing to do with her disappearance. And that statement to me is what's relevant. Because you can, question my morals and my poor decision making. That's fine. But don't stop looking for Laci. She's out there somewhere. She shouldn't be. She should be with our family.
You mentioned...
So let's keep working to bring her home.
I know that you mentioned during the network interview that only you and Laci know your marriage.
That's correct.
Explain that.
Just as anyone's, intimate relationships, it's, it's between those two people. And yes, you share things with people, and some things, you don't share with people.
Now, did Laci find out about the affair, or did you just come out and tell her?
No, I informed her about it. I don't believe she knew.
Why come out? I mean, what made you say, I'm going to tell her today? What made that day the day to tell her?
Just because it's the right thing to do. And as you know, you're not doing the right thing, it just, eats you up. You feel, sick to your stomach and you can't function and you have a hard time, looking at someone.
You mentioned it was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But from my understanding is that after you told Laci, you continued to see Amber. Was that also the
I saw her? No. No, it was not.
Explain that.
That is the explanation. It was not the right thing to do.
But you continued to do it.
Right, and it was not the right thing to do.
And then, even after Laci went missing, you continued to romance this girl?
No.
She claims that you called her on the 24th and told her...
I informed Amber about Laci's disappearance and the fact that I was married.
On the 24th?
No, not on the 24th. I believe it was probably it was a few days after.
She says that you called her on the 24th, December 24th, and told her you were with your parents in Maine.
Okay. I called her and informed her about Laci's disappearance.
On the 24th of December?
No, I did not. It was a few days after that I called her and told her I was married.
She claims, let me just finish, she just claims that you called her on the 24th, told her that you were going to Maine, you were visiting your family in Maine, and then you were going to Brussels.
Gloria, I'm not going to waste what little media time we have, and in this forum, with, this is a short newscast. I don't know how much of these words you're going to use or not. I'm not going to waste that by defending myself, talking about irrelevant things. It's better served if we talk about what happened and where's Laci. Okay. So the facts are that we know that on Christmas Eve, I left the house here around 9:30. She was here in the home. Okay, that's a fact that has to get out there because it's been reported erroneously that I saw her leave the house. Okay, she was in the house. It's one thing we know. Second thing we know is that the dog was returned to our yard with its leash on at 10:30 by a neighbor. Those are the two things we know about her disappearance. Hopefully those can help some people. There are things that we need to get out there are the tip lines, which is the Modesto Police tip line, 209-342-6166, and also 1-866-LACI info, LACI info. And that's a tip line for people who have talked to the police. Even if they talk to them, please call that tip line if you saw her that day, if you've seen her since, or if there's something you think is important in the neighborhood. We want to be very specific. The other big push we need is LaciPeterson.com. People can go there and print off the flyers and distribute those in every medical center, bus stop, high traffic area in the nation, because it could be the next flyer that brings her home to our family.
And I know more than I know that you want to find Laci, and the second thing you want to do is clear yourself from suspicion, correct? I mean, that is, you want the focus back on Laci and not on you.
I want people looking for Laci because they're not doing that right now. And that's why I'm sitting down with you in hopes that people will go, you know what? If I think he had some involvement, if I don't think he had some involvement, that doesn't matter because Laci is what matters. And she's out there missing and she needs to be home with her families. So I don't care to defend myself. I don't care what people think of me. As I've said, question my moral character if you want to. But look at your heart. Think of Laci, her picture, baby, and make the effort to bring her home. And that's a simple reality. That's a simple thing we need to do. Just, think whatever you want of me. As long as you're out there and you're comfortable with yourself, that you're doing what you need to be doing to find Laci and bring her home.
I know that law enforcement officials have told me that you won't take a lie detector test, that you've wavered back and forth on that. Why?
Well, let me say this about the investigation. I gave you 2 times earlier, 9:30 and 10:30 when the dog was returned here. Investigators on both sides, law enforcement and private, have asked me not to comment anymore about times, about conversations I have with the police, about the possible polygraph, tests I've taken or not. and other things surrounding the investigation so that it can be clear. So I'm simply not going to comment about those things. I'm not going to comment if I have or have not taken a polygraph with the police.
The life insurance policy. Why take one out on Laci? $250,000.
We have life insurance policies in place that were established when we bought this home that you're in right now 2 years ago. There was no life insurance policy taken out recently, as has been reported in the National Enquirer, a dubious source of alien information as well.
I know that a neighbor saw you removing things on the 24th. You mentioned this morning that it was umbrellas.
Yeah, and we have some large umbrellas for the backyard pool area. Market umbrellas, I think is the term for them.
Why would you store those in the winter?
It started to rain, so I was going to store them. Just like you asked why would I store them, I was taking them from the pool to store.
Officials of mine have told me, sources have mentioned to me, that there were cement bags that were in the storage area, and apparently a few of them were empty.
Sure.
Explain that.
Well, I could take you out in the backyard and show you all the cement work and brickwork that we've done to this home. You'd find, cement bags around here.
So this was something that it was home remodeling, or what were you doing with this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, we're starting to go into areas that investigators have asked me not to comment about. So we should probably, simply put the brakes on at that point.
Okay.
I don't mind commenting about the life insurance policy. But I don't want to give specific times or other information that could jeopardize what they find is valuable information in finding Laci.
Okay. I know that you mentioned on Good Morning America that it wouldn't surprise you if they found blood
Sure.
in your vehicles. Explain why.
Well, take a look at my hand. You can see, cuts here on my knuckles, numerous scars. I work on farms. I work with machinery. I know I cut my knuckle that day.
On what day?
On Christmas Eve.
Doing what?
Reaching in the toolbox of my truck and then into the pocket on the door. I cut open my knuckle and there's a blood stain on the door. On the driver's side.
Sources of mine have mentioned that you also, when you came home on the 24th, did some laundry. You washed your clothes. Do you understand why that may look a little suspicious to the average person? Why would he come home and do his laundry?
Well, the average guy that goes out in the ocean fishing, gets some salt water on, comes home wet.
And so
what are you going to do with your wet saltwater clothes?
Yeah. So
anyways, but now again, I probably shouldn't even mention that because of what they've asked me not to. So we should, we'll have to stop with that line of question.
One other thing to you, and that was, I talked to Mr. Rocha yesterday. Rocha.
Oh, great, good.
And he didn't have too many positive things to say.
Correct.
One of the things he said, and I'm quoting here, as far as you're concerned, it's lie after lie with Scott. Does the guy ever tell the truth?
That's unfortunate that that's his thought of me.
Do you understand why he feels that way, though? As far as the girlfriend is concerned?
Well, certainly, it was an inappropriate thing. And I never lied to Dennis. I've never lied to Dennis. I think I saw him last Laci's disappearance, and prior to that, it was a year before that Laci and I never saw him. That's her father, Dennis.
Right. And I have to ask you.
Sure.
Are you in any way connected to Laci's disappearance?
I had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. And again, even if people out there question that, if they would just look at their hearts and make the effort to bring her home to her family, I don't care what you think of me.
Because someone out there
someone out there knows. And you can be the key to finding them by putting out that next
You're
flyer.
looking at the camera.
Well, it's a plea to the audience. Okay. That's why we're doing this.
Go ahead. I mean, if you want to make a statement to anybody
well, that is. Look in your hearts and know that you've done what you can to bring Laci home. And if you haven't, please do it. And that's going to LaciPeterson.com and print out that flyer and put it in every medical building, on your car, and bus stations. Or use the tip lines if you have any information. That's what's going to bring her home. and think what you want of me. But you know in your hearts you should be helping Laci.
I know that.
That's really all I think I have to say.
Okay. I just want to ask
Thanks,
you
Corey.
one last thing, if that's okay. About Laci, because I know that you get really choked up when you talk about it. Tell me what you love about Laci.
God, what? I think you can sum it up pretty easily with looking at her photograph. The photograph for a big smile in the press.
Because you guys met in college, or
yeah.
And tell me what connected you two right away. I know she's got a beautiful smile, but what linked you guys?
Just being able to complete each other. That's it. But I mean, you asked how well, and all you have to do is look at that picture, and you know that she's a bright one, a bright light in a lot of people's lives.
You think she's still alive?
She is.
For sure.
Yes. Laci's still alive. She's out there and someone's holding her. And these are critical days that we have left until the due date of February 16th. And we just need all of your help.
You haven't said anything about your baby.
It's entirely too difficult to speak.
You go into the baby's room?
No, that door's closed.
How long will it remain closed?
So there's a little guy in there. Thank you.
These interviews are just painful and uncomfortable to watch for so many reasons, and we'll play some of the Diane Sawyer interview during our next episode, which is, believe it or not, even more uncomfortable to watch than this one was. And by the way, if you're wondering where Scott's attorney, Kirk McAllister, was while his client impaled himself in front of millions of people, he was probably somewhere watching, no doubt facepalming through most of it, after strongly advising his client not to do these interviews. On the 24th of January, just before Amber Frey took the podium at the Modesto Police Department, Brent and Sharon went on camera to thank the Red Lion Hotel for their hospitality and express her gratitude to all the members of the community who helped keep the volunteer center running up until its closure the week before. Brent announced that he and the Rocha family were no longer supporting Scott, saying, quote, "I trusted him and I stood by him in the initial phases of my sister's disappearance. However, Scott has not been forthcoming with information regarding my sister's disappearance. I am only left to question what else he may be hiding." End quote. He concluded his statement with a message to his little sister.
Laci, this has been the most disturbing and emotional time in my life. As your older brother, I can only wish that I had the opportunity to be there to defend you from the person that decided to take you away from me. We talked about our children growing up together and spending summers at each other's house. Now that you and Connor have been taken away from me, I realize that my children will not have cousins to grow up with. I hope you know how much I love you and how important you are to me.
Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you liked the episode, give it a thumbs up before you go. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, hit the bell for notifications. And until next time, of course, stay safe, be kind, and memento mori.